There is a kind of knowledge that does not argue. When you encounter it, you don't feel convinced, you feel recognized. It doesn't give you answers so much as it rearranges the way you see questions. It doesn't demand belief, it sharpens perception. The Rosicrucians believed this kind of knowledge was the only kind that mattered. One of their central teachings was this: you cannot change the world by acting upon it directly. You can only change the world by changing the level of consciousness from which you act. Another teaching followed naturally. Truth cannot be handed to an unprepared mind. It must be discovered through inner development. This is why they distrusted mass instruction, why they avoided literal explanations, why their teachings were encoded rather than declared. They understood something most societies forget. When wisdom is given without maturity, it turns into dogma. When power is given without insight, it turns into tyranny. So they taught in symbols. They taught that the human being is layered: body, psyche, intellect, and spirit, and that most people live almost entirely in the outer layers, reacting to appearances rather than understanding causes. They taught that perception itself can be refined, that a person who learns to see clearly becomes harder to deceive, harder to manipulate, and less dependent on external authority. And this is what set them apart. The Rosicrucians were never meant to be obvious. That was the point. They did not announce themselves as a church, a kingdom, or a political power. They appeared quietly in the early 17th century through a series of strange, anonymous manifestos. Texts that did not demand belief, but invited discernment. And almost immediately they caused a shockwave across Europe, not because they claimed miracles, but because they claimed knowledge. Knowledge that suggested humanity was capable of far more than it had been allowed to imagine. The Rosicrucians emerged at a moment of deep crisis: religious corruption, political instability, scientific awakening, and widespread intellectual stagnation. The old world was cracking and the new one had not yet formed. Into that fracture, the Rosicrucian texts made a radical claim: that there existed a hidden fraternity devoted not to power but to the reformation of human consciousness. Not revolution by force, reformation by understanding. What set the Rosicrucians apart was not secrecy for secrecy's sake. It was selective transmission. They believed wisdom could not be given indiscriminately. That truth, when handed to an unprepared mind, becomes distorted or dangerous.